Hello and welcome to episode 302 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Ian, welcome to the first regularly scheduled podcast of 2025.
Indeed, and there's a lot. We were going to take last week off and then didn't in the face of two horrific crashes, one with an Azerbaijan Airlines in Kazakhstan and one with a Jeju Air 737 in South Korea. This week, we've got some updates on those, some updates on the crash that began 2024 in Japan, as well as a year on from the Alaska Airlines mid-cabin exit door plug blowout.
And also, we've just got some regular news that's fun.
We just have some
and
regular
harmless.
old news.
And just, you read it and you go, huh, okay, that was news. We like that stuff.
Yeah, helpful stuff to know about the industry. Some of it's annoying, but somewhat amusing. And then towards the end of the show, we'll go, huh?
Hmm?
Exactly. So let's get into it. We have updates on the investigations into the twin crashes that we reported extensively on last week. First of all, thank you so much to everyone who watched the special video episode that we put together and all of the kind words that you had to say about the work that went into that. We appreciate that so very much. Lots of you suggested that that be the new format for the regular show. Unfortunately, we just don't have the time budget to make that an every week thing, but rest assured that we do find it a useful and worthwhile endeavor for that specific type of content. So we will look into when visual representation is necessary, we'll be there.
We didn't even tell you about the first time we recorded that episode and the audio vanished.
Yeah,
so that video has some complications to it, but that was
there
the
you
actual
go. Yeah, that was take two.
Episode.
Oh boy. Okay. Speaking of audio and video, or really just audio here, the cockpit voice recorder from the Jeju 737 has been recovered. It has been downloaded, and investigators were able to extract all 2 hours of audio from those recorders. So that has been a successful download of the audio from that aircraft. The flight data recorder was damaged in the crash, and that particular recorder has been sent as of Monday, the 6th of January, to the National Transportation Safety Board laboratory in Washington, D.C. in the U.S., where the NTSB will hopefully work its magic in order to extract whatever data is available on the flight data recorder. So as we talked about last week, that's a hopeful effort given the NTSB's history of being able to get data out of, well, pretty much near anything.
Yeah, we've seen the magic they can do on pulling the data from that. We don't know what 2 hours the cockpit voice recorder recorded because we don't know when the recorder stopped recording. Hopefully it kept recording up until the very last moments, but there is a chance that at some point prior to the end of the flight, let's say, it stopped recording due to a loss of electrical power or any other number of issues. But the mere fact that it recorded the maximum 2 hours of something leading up to that crash is exceptionally good news that they were able to download it. There are few flights in the past recently that I can recall that the CVR data would have been probably so illuminating as it's going to be, as opposed to the FDR. I think this is really absolutely critical data that we're going to get off the voice recorder here. I don't know how much the FDR is going to be of use. Certainly there's going to be some information, but the voice recorder here is going to be absolutely key to figuring out what happened on that airplane.
Yeah, exactly. I think Jason's right. The CVR is going to be much more illuminating. But hopefully we'll get as much data from
that's good.
Both of them as much as possible, and we'll await a preliminary report somewhat soon. And then obviously the final report is going to be one that we read with great interest. In Kazakhstan, the updates on the crash there, both of the recorders, the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder, have been read out by the Brazilian authorities in Brazil. So that has happened. We're not sure what they were able to glean or how much data was available. But usually no news is good news on that front. When they say they were able to read the recorders, that usually means that the data is there. They generally say that the data wasn't there if the data wasn't there. So no news being good news. The president of Azerbaijan also gave an interesting update on something that we had talked about last week, where his office confirmed, and he confirmed that the Azerbaijan Airlines flight that returned to Baku did so because of airspace warnings at that time that the aircraft received, and they were able to turn around and return to Baku. His office is questioning why the accident aircraft wasn't made aware of any dangers, if in fact there were dangers at the time.
Yeah, I'm assuming timing was everything. Something as small as a 30-minute delay can change everything. That by the time that particular flight got to the region, there was an alert out and they turned around, but maybe the accident flight, they didn't have that advance notice. So these are all things that I guess the investigation is going to be looking into. I would assume so.
As best it can, perhaps?
Yeah, as best it can. Difficult when you're working under these kind of conditions in an active conflict zone like this, but really looking forward, I guess, to the voice recorder on this one as well, because I'm sure the conversations had up in the flight deck are going to answer a lot of questions. And not that we'll be hearing it, but just seeing the readout of what that crew was doing to keep the aircraft in the air is going to be quite the stressful read, I fear.
Yeah.
But we're not getting that for quite some time.
No, probably not, in at least until the final report. Let's go back to the beginning of last year, and we'll start with an update on Boeing, from Boeing itself, from Alaska Airlines, and from the FAA. Boeing, for its part, says that 1 year on from the Alaska Airlines door plug blowout, things are improving. Boeing recently unveiled further what they're calling enhancements to its safety and quality plan, which is focused on a wholesale change of the corporate culture, which, as we all know, is a very easy thing to do.
Sure. Especially when you don't do it until, you're forced to do it.
So the report that they put out, touting their past year of changes and what they are calling success and what they're seeing for the future, falls into 4 categories. We have safety and quality culture, product safety and quality training, simplifying processes, and eliminating defects. So the first one, the safety and quality culture, has focused on a few different things. One was the quality stand downs that Boeing has enacted throughout the past year. So stopping work so that they can make sure that they're doing it in a quality way, ensuring that Boeing employees, as part of the Speak Up system, which is a confidential reporting of any safety issues that any employee might see. So they've beefed that system up to make it more actionable, I guess, rather than what some employees had termed as toothless previously. Product safety and quality training. So all employees are now going through additional product safety and quality training. They are enhancing specific trainings for people who are assembling the airplanes, as well as the people who are inspecting the assembly of the airplanes who are working for Boeing. And they've also brought in additional training courses and schedules for Boeing employees to improve their skills as they choose. So they can choose from a variety of trainings to take. Simplifying manufacturing processes has been a big priority for Boeing because things got way too complicated, as their auditing has found out. So now they have new compliance protocols. They have redefined how they do installations, especially within the 737 line. And they are also making sure that the people that perform the work are saying they performed the work, so that they know who performed the work. And Jason, that's important because why?
Documentation is good to know when someone didn't do the right work. Is that the answer you're looking for?
Both that. I was thinking specifically
removed. Well,
I
no,
was thinking
who
specifically in the context of the door, where it took us 6 months and the NTSB going scorched earth to figure out, okay, what was the timeline of removing these bolts? Who did the work? Why was the work done? And
we
then
still don't have that answer. We still don't know.
We don't know specifically who, but we've narrowed it down seemingly as much as we can.
Yes.
So
that is not
it'll be
great.
good to know.
That is definitely a sign of a completely failed process.
And finally, eliminating defects, which seems to me to be a fantastic thing. A big way that they are trying to eliminate defects is by purchasing their main fuselage supplier. So bringing Spirit Air Systems bringing Spirit Air Systems in-house, increasing inspection points across the entire production process from the very beginning to the final assembly, looking at ensuring compliance is met all the way through each step of the process, as well as coming up with, and I have to believe this is an improvement of a process, not a brand new one, ensuring that foreign object debris is not left in critical work areas.
Yes, that is definitely not something new. If you've ever been on any Boeing factory floor, there's all sorts of markings for FOD awareness and FOD critical zones. So that's definitely not new, but it doesn't really matter if people aren't, obeying it and actually checking, where'd my wrench go? It's probably fine. So that's not new, but it's probably good to have some renewed interest in it.
So all of this sounds great. That's Boeing saying how good it's doing. What do the other folks say?
There's a couple other involved parties here. The FAA is one. They took to Medium to pen a piece, specifically Mike Whitaker, the FAA administrator, right after it was announced that he'd be resigning from the position, put out this piece, looking back basically saying, man, hell, that was a hell of a year, wasn't it? Mostly about Boeing in this regard. But there were some parts where I don't quite remember the way the FAA does about the immediate moments in after the accident happened, where I'll quote here, I spoke with our safety experts and transportation secretaries Pete Buttigieg to get all the facts and inputs before making the decision to issue an emergency airworthiness directive grounding all MAX aircraft built with this type of door plug. I mean, do you quite remember it that way, where I guess they did ground those particular aircraft, but then they were quickly ungrounded after a very quick inspection, and then all MAX 9s were grounded? It was a bit fuzzier than they're laying out here, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think that this misses a few of the key confusions that happened to understand what was the role of the FAA here, what was the role of the airlines, what authority were they operating under, what airworthiness directives were they operating with regard to. Because, as Jason mentioned, there was an initial Alaska saying we're grounding our fleet pending inspections. And then they did some very cursory inspections.
Quick inspections.
And those flights were back in the
overnight time.
Right. Which, as we now know, were sufficient because they looked and they said, yeah, there are bolts there. The plane can fly now.
Yes, they did not know that they were merely looking for bolts. As we recall, there were a number of aircraft, more than there should be, where the bolts were loose or some other bolts were loose. So that there were other issues uncovered by this. But I don't think it happened as cleanly as the FAA would like us to remember. But I digress. The FAA goes on to saying that, in addition to multiple meetings we had with Boeing's leadership at the FAA's office, he personally visited Boeing facilities several times in 2024. They are pleased with the progress at Boeing, specifically about the voluntary reporting from employees at Boeing. And I quote here, because of our work, we received a surge in employee safety reports during the past year, and that's encouraging. An increase in reports, whether at a manufacturer, an airline, or at the FAA, can be one sign of a healthy safety culture. So, I agree. That's good news. It's not great that there are so many reports coming from employees, but the important bit is that there are reports coming from employees that in the past, they may have not wanted to speak up for whatever reason.
Yeah. I mean, It's tempting to say, look how many safety reports there are. That can't be good. And certainly that is to be considered. I think Jason's right. I think the important thing here is that they feel comfortable, they feel secure enough to report these, where previously there was certainly a fear, and this has been well documented. There was a fear that if you said something bad about the safety, there were going to be repercussions.
Yes, so that is hopefully something of the past. The FAA went on to say that they have more inspectors on the factory floors. They capped production levels of the 737 MAX, which still is in effect today. I don't believe there's been any relevant recent news about lifting the cap on 737 MAX production. It goes on to say, we conducted an in-depth audit of the production line and more significantly required Boeing to develop a comprehensive plan to fix its systematic production and quality problems, which would be in the report you just read off about the production quality problems and the comprehensive plan to address it. So mission accomplished in that regard.
Yeah, I think we are certainly moving in the right direction.
Yes.
All signs are pointing to us moving in the right direction.
That's good news.
Let's talk about how Alaska feels about all of this.
Alaska also put out its own 2024 retrospective, having had a not great year since almost the start. I think it was Friday, January 4th. It too has inspectors on the ground at Boeing facilities who were actually there during, I found this to be interesting, during the machinist strike. They were there still inspecting aircraft, doing work, which is nice to see. But Alaska goes to say, to further enhance our oversight at Boeing Renton, we've augmented our team with 3 M&E employees. What is M&E?
Maintenance and engineering?
Sure, they don't actually say, they just say M&E, whatever. Employees who possess expertise in aircraft maintenance and inspection. Our 3 aircraft acquisition representatives are on site at Boeing 5 days a week, covering different shifts and remaining on call to conduct inspections as defined by our standards. They too say they have seen improvements in Boeing's mechanic training program, which I think is a pretty key aspect, that you're not just fixing what's broken now, but you're also improving training processes for the next generation of mechanics coming on board. Alaska says there's been a focus on communicating the importance of safety and compliance with a strong emphasis on voluntary reporting. So that's another party saying here that the voluntary reporting of issues at Boeing, they've seen positive changes. So it's not just the FAA saying that, but it's also an airline saying that we're seeing more reports of things, but that is actually a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, when an important customer that's spending, hundreds of millions of dollars is saying, okay, we're feeling more comfortable about doing this, that's a good thing.
Yes. So that's it from an airline perspective. You're not going to have many other airlines chiming in here about what's going on the Boeing factory floor, but Alaska was obviously pretty acutely impacted by this. But things are looking good. They say they're encouraged to see Boeing's leadership focus on safety and their commitment to cultural change.
Excellent. Let's leave it there.
But now it also has to worry about the 787 since, that's a thing too. So they do actually mention, Alaska says it will extend its efforts to the 787 line in Charleston as we prepare for future deliveries. I did find that part a little interesting. The Charleston production facility for the 787 as always has its issues, but now we're seeing airlines, even Alaska here, put its own people on the 787 factory floor, even if there hasn't been an issue that has directly impacted it. So that was an interesting parting note, I think.
They're prepared.
Yeah, prepared to hopefully find nothing.
Exactly. Yes. Okay, so that was January 5th, 2024. Let's go back to January 1st, 2024, and discuss the ground collision between a Japan Airlines A350 and a Japan Coast Guard Dash 8. This happened in Tokyo, where the Japan Airlines A350 was landing on runway 34 right. The Japan Coast Guard Dash 8 had taxied into position onto runway 34 right. The A350 touched down and then collided with the Dash 8. The Japanese Transportation Safety Board has released an extensive preliminary report, 166 pages. It's all in Japanese. So there's no English version that Jason and I have been able to find. However, thanks to the magic of the internet and a bit of large language modeling, we've been able to translate the bits that are helpful and new to understand. What's interesting is not necessarily the sequence of events, because that's generally known. What's interesting in the preliminary report so far is the modeling that Japanese investigators have done about what the pilots on the A350 were able to see and saw as they approached the runway, and why they might not have done anything about a Dash 8 sitting on the runway. So we know that it was nighttime. We now know that the moon had not risen, and that the pilot flying was the first officer who was flying as part of a training flight on the A350. So there were 3 pilots on the A350 flight deck. There was a training captain in the left seat. There was a first officer who was being trained in the right seat. And then in the jump seat, there was a supervisory training captain. Both pilots, the captain in the left seat and the pilot flying, first officer in the right seat, were using the HUD in the A350. In combination with that, and the fact that simulation modeling by the Japanese investigators show that what the pilots would have seen is basically no airplane on the runway. Because of how the Dash 8 is built, it appears that all of the lighting on the Dash 8 blends in with all of the lighting on the runway. So this was one of the big questions that we had about, didn't they see that there was an airplane? Because there was no attempt at a go around. The aircraft touched down and then saw that there was an aircraft in front of it. So this is going a long way to answering that particular question. And the other thing that has been stuck in my mind, and Jason, you and I talked about this a little before we started recording, is that this airport, Haneda, has a system that alerts air traffic controllers to runway conflicts. And was that system not working? Was that system compromised in some way? The investigators look into that in detail. And because this is a preliminary report, we don't quite have all the answers. But one of the things that the report notes so far is that this particular system is often a nuisance to air traffic control. Because of its sensitivity, you often get false positives. Or if the system says there's a conflict, it's still well within the margin of safety for the separation of those aircraft. And so air traffic controllers often pay no mind or little mind to it. There's also in the report the information that there is no audio warning for this system in the control tower. So it would rely on the air traffic controllers looking down at a screen and noticing that the colors on the screen had changed and being able to interpret what had happened promptly and effectively.
Not a great system, especially with how busy and sometimes overburdened air traffic controllers are. Having to notice that a color has changed is probably not the best way to go about doing things. But we have heard this before, and we have seen this before. Most notably, I think back to the American 777-300ER at JFK, where that was one of the first, I think, big newsworthy near runway incursion things. What was that? Was that last year or 2023 or even 2022 at this rate? I feel like it's been a while.
3, but we'll double check.
Maybe one of those years in the past. But we saw this in the extensive interviews with air traffic controllers, that nuisance alerts from systems like this degrades operational awareness, that controllers and pilots end up ignoring alerts because they are so often faulty alerts. Whether this is something that dates back decades and decades and decades from the flight deck of an aircraft, where you may get faulty ground proximity warning alerts. So a pilot pulls a circuit breaker to shut that system off, when in the future, that warning probably would have been really helpful in certain crashes. In this case, you have an alert that's probably going off too often, so it's just ignored when every now and then maybe it shouldn't be ignored, but if it's going off so often and it's disrupting workflows, you're going to lead to this exact situation. And I find it particularly interesting when we talked about how the A350 pilots didn't see it. Anyone who's been at an airport at night and looked out at the taxiways and runways and warning lights and all these beacons, it's not hard to imagine that the flight crew wasn't able to pick out, oh, those particular lights must be an aircraft on the runway that shouldn't be there. Like, would they even be thinking that? Especially when it's kind of, you're looking at it from above and everything's on a 2D plane. Man, I can't imagine having to pick out the 3 lights that happen to be an aircraft.
Right. And I think when this happened, or maybe when we were discussing it another time, I shared the photo that I have of, I think it's an Atlas Air 747 departing, and we were taxiing behind it. And I snapped a picture out the window. And I knew it was there because we had held for it to get into position and begin its takeoff roll. But if I hadn't known it was there and taken that photo, I'm not sure I would have known.
Yeah. In cases like this, and even though the pilots were using the HUD, which is the heads-up display, which is a glass transparent screen that the pilots can choose to look through, which overlays information that they may have seen on the primary flight display, like airspeed and autopilot status and altitude. I don't believe any really commercial aircraft have thermal imaging. So even though they were looking through a HUD, Ian, do you happen to know if any A350s actually have thermal imagery?
I don't think
so.
The A350s do. The only commercial aircraft I can think of would be the FedEx fleet.
Yep, exactly. The FedEx, and I think UPS too. Even way back on the MD-11s, those aircraft have a little thing that sticks out the nose that is actually an infrared sensor, which can overlay. It's basically night vision goggles for an airplane.
Yep.
And this is the thing civilian commercial airliners just do not have. I think it would be a very interesting discussion to see, would that have prevented possibly this particular accident? Maybe. We could certainly talk to UPS or FedEx to see how helpful that has been to their pilots over the years.
We can talk about that in the context of Austin, Texas, where you had a FedEx flight coming in over a Southwest 737. But one of the things I wanted to mention that is not discussed in the report, because we just don't know the answer yet, is why the Japan Coast Guard aircraft taxied onto the runway in the first place. They were instructed to hold short of the runway. They were not told to enter the runway. So a lot of the final report is going to have to go away to answering why that aircraft was on the runway to begin with. They do talk about the controller's plan. And this is interesting, the coordination between the controllers, where you have a plan for this aircraft to depart. And you have 2 arriving aircraft that are traveling at a much higher rate of speed because they're both commercial turbofan-powered aircraft. And then you have this Dash 8, which is going to be traveling much slower. The plan was to land the Japan Airlines A350, then depart this Dash 8, then let that other aircraft land. The controllers, trying to coordinate between the two of them, tried to negotiate, well, let me get these 2 landings in, then you can depart the Dash 8. And one of the controllers said, no, this is the plan. This is the one we're going to go with because we've got, departure backups. We need to keep things moving. So it's interesting to read about that coordination between the multiple ground controllers and tower controllers and all of the folks involved in that. But we still don't know why that Dash 8 was on the runway when it should not have been.
Yep. Just sad story all around. Thankfully, again, there weren't any serious injuries on board the A350, but the damage to the Dash 8 was pretty devastating.
Yeah, complete and total destruction. Only the captain, one of 6 people on board, survived that crash. We now turn our attention to Switzerland, where a Swiss A220 was en route from Bucharest to Zurich, diverted to Graz, where because the aircraft suffered an engine failure and there was smoke in the cabin. At the time, we knew that members of the crew and about a dozen passengers had received medical attention. Unfortunately, at the end of 2024, on the 30th of December, one of the flight attendants died as a result of the injuries that they sustained during that flight. A internal Swiss memo viewed by Aerotelegraph, the German aviation publication, says that the investigation thus far has flagged a, quote, previously unknown fault pattern with the Pratt & Whitney 1500G geared turbofan engine. So not a phrase that you want to be reading when it comes to engines. So that is something that we will be following very closely. The engine itself, after a few days inspection in Switzerland, is now being sent to the Pratt & Whitney facility in, I'm not exactly sure which facility it's being sent to, but the Pratt & Whitney facility in the US for further examination to see what happened and to better understand what this previously unknown fault pattern might be.
Yeah, a really sad story for Swiss to end the year. It's hard to believe that a flight attendant could have died due to possibly just because of the smoke condition on board. That's crazy. It's really, really tragic stuff. And not to pivot to more Pratt & Whitney stuff from a tragic death on board, but yet another thing that we have to worry about with Pratt & Whitney GTF engines, because this one, what was the terminology? Previously unknown fault pattern? Did we need that with these engines at this point? Man, it's just the engine that keeps on giving.
Yeah. So looking closely at this one, let's stick with Pratt & Whitney issues, and we'll talk about the fact that Air Baltic is trimming its summer schedule yet again because of engine maintenance delays with the A220 engines yet again.
Yet again. Again, another story that just keeps happening over and over and over, where you have Air Baltic saying, hey, that we're not being taken care of like Pratt & Whitney said we would be taken care of, and they're telling us basically to pound sand is a risk of doing business, and we're not being made whole. But really not great stuff for an airline that is 100% wholly dependent on this engine. Remember, Air Baltic only operates the A220-300, which they have chosen the Pratt & Whitney engines, so they don't really have a choice. But really seems like Air Baltic just continually gets the short stick here with this engine, and yet again won't be able to fulfill its schedule, on top of having to fill all of the charter operations that I'm sure it was already contracted to do for this coming summer.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's, become part of their business model, where you have an Air Baltic A220 operating, for Lufthansa on behalf of Discover.
Sure, why not?
Why not? This is the first time I think the FAA has ever issued, or DOT has ever issued, one of these types of fines.
Yes, it is in fact the first time the DOT has ever issued what they call an enforcement action against an airline for operating chronically delayed flights. So every month, the FAA puts out, or the DOT, I guess on behalf of the FAA, puts out statistics about all sorts of operational things from airlines: on time performance, complaints from the general public, the amount of diversions, the amount of operations at airports. And one of the things they keep track of beyond just delayed flights are chronically delayed flights, which is defined as any domestic flight that is operated at least 10 times per month and arrives more than 30 minutes late, more than 50% of the time during a single month. Did you get all that?
That's baseball statistics right there.
Basically, it's just saying this flight sucks and it's delayed all the time. That's what that means.
That's what they should. I mean, I'm all for straightforward notation here.
Straightforward information. You all know these flights. Back in my growing up days, going from family in Florida to New York, that for me was always JetBlue Flight 70, the 8:30 p.m. departure from Palm Beach to New York. Historically, always late. But I knew that, so whatever. Doesn't matter. But the DOT apparently decided it wants to start enforcing stuff and hit JetBlue with a $2 million penalty for using what they said, quote, a prohibited, unrealistic scheduling practice. They're basically saying JetBlue scheduled these flights knowing there was no realistic way they were going to be on time, or at least not chronically delayed. It goes on to say JetBlue operated 4 chronically delayed flights at least 145 times between June 2022 and November 2023, and that the airline itself was responsible for the delay 70% of the time. So there's no scapegoating FAA air traffic delay programs or the weather. No, these flights were delayed at least 70% of the time due to JetBlue's own scheduling practices. I believe $1 million will be paid to the DOT, and another $1 million will be held to pay out future victims of chronically delayed flights. Interestingly,
victims of
not past victims of chronically delayed flights during this time period. I'm not why it's future looking, but very interesting to see the DOT kind of come out of nowhere and issue a fine about chronically delayed flights, because they're not all that common. But if you look in the DOT monthly statistics, there are always a couple of chronically delayed flights. So which I think they have to be delayed that certain amount for multiple months. I think 3 months in a row at minimum before they're called chronically delayed. I think it's 3, maybe 4 months. But yeah, JetBlue certainly operated a number of flights very delayed, and the DOT said, enough. Okay, nice.
All right. Condor is an airline that has built itself into a premium leisure carrier. They've, over the past few years, completely revamped their brand with the love 'em or hate 'em beach towel themed livery and a premium product that Jason has enjoyed.
I did. I flew it summer of last year to get to Hamburg, and the A330 product, both in business and economy, was, let's say, better than the competition in Germany.
But as it turns out, that competition was propping up Condor. And that agreement that was propping up Condor has been struck down by the courts. So here's the deal. Competition authorities in Germany had forced Lufthansa to agree to an interline agreement to carry Condor passengers once they got to Frankfurt. So Condor brings all of these international leisure folk into Germany, and then they can fly onward on Lufthansa without any friction as far as the ticket buying is concerned at a better rate than Condor otherwise would have gotten.
And I can attest to the fact that the integration between Condor and Lufthansa was better than Delta and KLM, and better than a couple other airlines that are actual like partners in a JV. It was actually frictionless. I really was impressed by it. But that's going to change, isn't it, Ian?
Yeah. So the German court ruled that the forced interline agreement no longer applies.
Or the forced beneficial pricing.
Yes. I mean, they can have an interline agreement if they want.
But they're not going to get that discounted rate.
Right. And so as a result, Condor has completely revamped its schedule for the coming summer, removing flights from Frankfurt to Canadian cities of Edmonton, Calgary, and U.S. cities of Baltimore, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Phoenix, and San Antonio, which I believe San Antonio, the Condor flight from San Antonio was the only transatlantic flight from San Antonio.
Edmonton is in there as well, I believe. I don't think you said Edmonton, but Baltimore, Edmonton, Halifax, MSP, Phoenix, and San Antonio. That last one, that one's got.
I missed Halifax.
Halifax.
Given that they had spent so much money, the city itself had spent so much money to entice Condor to come.
Yes, and there are some oddities here that this blog post from Cranky Flyer points out, that there are some cities that had so much connecting traffic over Frankfurt, like Toronto, but that flight's not getting canned. So maybe they think they can still drum up enough connecting traffic. But man, this is, in turn, Condor has spun up some domestic flights within Germany to try to feed its own long-haul flights, but those aren't going to cut it. They're like one a day to Hamburg to replace Lufthansa's hourly shuttle, basically. And I don't know about you, but I don't really want an 8-hour layover in Frankfurt on my way to Hamburg.
You might make your connection.
You might have a better chance at making your connection. That's true.
Hour layover in
but
Frankfurt.
You're not going to like it because you're going to spend 8 hours on a line. But in turn, on the long haul side, Condor is now trying other destinations. So 5x weekly to Bangkok, 3x weekly to Johannesburg, and 2x weekly to Panama City, which is interesting. But man, this is not often you see an airline having to change its entire business model basically overnight, but they knew this was coming. This was a court battle that had been going on for years. So I'm sure they had this plan B in their back pocket, but it is not great because Condor was actually had a nice successful little operation. So it's very different than what we see with Southwest, where you had this activist investor come in overnight and demand changes, which they were not at all prepared to make. Whereas Condor, the writing was on the wall. It was just, I'm sure they were hoping they didn't have to do this.
Exactly. Speaking of reconfiguring your fleet, but this one's by choice, Maldivian has added an A330-200 to its fleet. So joining the Twin Otters on floats, among other really small aircraft, though they do have an A320, I believe. They are adding an A330 in the hopes that they will soon be operating flights to China, possibly Beijing, Shanghai, and Chengdu, but also to Africa and Europe upcoming. That'll be interesting to see how that works out.
We've seen this movie before, and it doesn't always have a happy ending. So hopefully they know what they're doing and they have the money to back this up and it doesn't end up killing the entire operation, as we've seen time and time again. So good luck.
They're starting with one plane. So I think that's a smart move.
Yeah, that's a smart move. But even just having one wide body when you don't have really any other aircraft of that class, that's very draining resource-wise.
Hopefully people want to go to the Maldives, I guess.
I mean, I do.
Yeah, we should test this out, just to be sure. They should.
Sure. Let's go.
We should double check on that. This is an interesting one. This is one of those things that makes perfect sense because airlines are always chasing efficiency. And so EasyJet's going to, use lighter paint.
Okay. So it's not lighter paint. It's a lower weight
less paint
method, which apparently saves 27 kilograms per
It ain't
plane.
nothing.
It's not nothing. 27 kilograms per plane, per flight, per day, per year. That adds up with a fleet the size of EasyJet's, which apparently this method has been used on 38 aircraft already, which is, hey, that's a nice little chunk of the fleet.
Yeah. 1,300 tons of fuel saved each year.
That's a lot. And they will complete it by 2030 for the whole fleet because aircraft paint cycles, they take a while. Ask United how its new paint job rollout is going. It might be a minute. But hey, that's just one way an airline can reduce its carbon footprint because they have struggled so mightily in doing it in any other way, SAFs included, that if you can use less paint, why not?
Hey, go for it. Okay, so we'll take that fuel saved and we'll give it to Air Greenland.
Oh, they need every drop.
Because they need more of it.
What is going on in Greenland with their one wide-body airplane?
Their one A330-800. So a few months ago, Greenland inaugurated its newest expanded airport in the capital city of Nuuk. That particular airport had long had a 900-meter runway. The runway over many years was expanded to 2,200 meters, which allowed the landing and operation of the A330, which had previously only been able to fly into Kangerlussuaq.
Which is not where people typically want to go.
No, but it is where they had a really long runway and very good weather all year because it was much more sheltered area that was not subject to wind and snow in the winter nearly as much as Nuuk is. But people really want to go to Nuuk because that's the capital of Greenland. And so they expanded the runway, they expanded the airport, built a whole new terminal. But as it turns out, you can build all you want. You can't make the runway not slippery when it snows. And so it's the 8th of January. So the eight days, the aircraft has diverted 3 times. And it's gone back to Copenhagen once, and it's diverted to Keflavik twice, and then gone back to Copenhagen. At least one time, and I will go back and check the data and put a link in the show notes for this one, but at least one time they contracted Wamos to come in and operate a follow-on flight so that they could move all of the passengers from Copenhagen that they needed to. Looking at the flight paths from Copenhagen to Nuuk, there is not a single instance this year so far that did not involve, at least I take that back, the 6th of January did not involve a long bit of holding the 7th of January.
No, the 6th, they went to Reykjavik.
Yes, they went to Reykjavik. On the 7th of January, it did not involve a lot of holding. I was trying to set myself up for kind of a big reveal, but that didn't work. The 7th of January, they did not have to hold anywhere because they went directly to Kangerlussuaq.
Oh, well, I guess it's good to admit defeat and just go to plan B. But for those asking, why would they, and we actually didn't really mention this, but the diversions back to Copenhagen, those are, how long are these flights? They're like 10-hour flights round trip?
So, yeah, they're
about an 8 to 10, depending on how long they hold. 8 to 10 hours from Copenhagen to Copenhagen. They have an interesting explainer on their own website on why they do this instead of holding longer or diverting to Reykjavik or diverting back to where they typically operated the flight in the past. There are reasons for everything. It comes down to typically, well, we don't want to land elsewhere in Greenland because that's not where people want to go and that's not their ultimate destination. And then we strand the aircraft there and then the crew times out and then the plane's stuck there. The same goes for Reykjavik. If they divert to Reykjavik, well, then the crew times out and everyone's stuck there. So it's easier, operationally speaking, at least, to go all the way back to Copenhagen where they have another crew ready to go for them to try again the next day. So there is method to the madness. And apparently enough people asked this question that they have an FAQ all about this on their own website, which we will leave a link to in the show notes. It's a well thought out plan.
It is a well thought out plan, but I think they've thought even more about this after the fact, because they have started diverting to Keflavik, where I think, I'm not certain, but I think they're picking up a positioned crew and then flying back to Copenhagen.
That would seem like a prudent decision, at least now when conditions apparently might not be good in Nuuk. They can have another crew out there, which is expensive for a small airline, but it's probably cheaper than having to pay all of that compensation and hotel nights and all that for all those passengers back in Copenhagen. Man, best laid plans don't always work out that way.
I kind of glossed over this, but I think it's worth mentioning why the aircraft can't land. It's not because the winds... It's not necessarily because of it's raining or snowing at the moment. What it is the calculations of the runway friction and braking action are not good enough for the aircraft to safely stop on the runway, which goes to the question of how come other aircraft don't have any problem landing. So smaller aircraft were able to make it into Nuuk on days when the Air Greenland A330 was not. And the issue is really, it's still only a 2,200 meter runway, which isn't that long. Long enough, but not that long. So it's the calculations of, here's the report of the runway conditions. We put it into the computer and the computer says, nope, you can't do that.
Yep. Not great. I hope the conditions improve in summer when a couple of other airlines, most notably United, will start operating.
It does not seem like this will be a problem in the summer.
No, I hope not, at least. But if they do have to divert, I look forward to seeing a Newark to Newark 8-hour 737 flight. I don't know. That would... Man, if there's any airport in the world you don't want to divert back to after an 8-hour flight, it has got to be Newark.
It's Newark. Okay, we told you at the beginning of the show we would make you say, huh? And this is the story for that. There was a fire in the window of an ERJ-175?
Huh?
Somehow?
Yeah.
And there's video of it. It's not like somebody said there was fire.
If they had said it, I wouldn't have believed them.
No, there is video. There's a flame
There's
flickering
something on the window.
the window. So whatever it is, if you're familiar enough with the Embraer E175 and what is in the sidewall that might have been a light, email us podcast@fr24.com and let us know what is going on.
Yeah.
Because thoroughly confused are Jason and I.
It's something that you would typically associate with the flight deck windows because there are electronics in those windows from
Sure.
heating elements to radios, I guess, other stuff. So yeah, it's totally possible to have some sort of electrical arcing there. But on a passenger window, huh?
I
wish
don't know.
there was some information aside from just the video here, but we got nothing. So if you got something, please let us know.
Please. Let's close the first regularly scheduled episode of AvTalk with the last regularly scheduled statistical wrap-up from the FAA for the year 2024.
Everyone loves a good year-end wrap, including government agencies. And Ian, can I quiz you, or did you already look at the results?
You can quiz me, sure.
Okay. Number one, busiest airport in 2024 in the U.S. as measured by tower operations.
By tower operations. So how many times the control tower performed surgery?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
All right. Excellent.
How many aircraft came and left?
Let's say busiest by operations, we're going to go with Atlanta.
You would be correct with 802,423 tower operations. Number two.
Chicago O'Hare International Airport.
You would be correct with 776,854. And number three is...
Ooh, that one's tough.
That one's tougher. It's a close race between all three of these, actually.
It's either LAX or DFW.
What are you going to go with?
I'm going to say DFW.
You are correct. 750,167 tower operations for the year. Do you want to double down and go for the next question?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This is fun.
Top travel day overall for all of 2024. Let's start with the month. What month do you think it was in?
July.
You are correct. What day of the week was the busiest travel day in July? You are also correct. Are you cheating?
Yes. No, that's just the day that we tracked the most flights. Well, the third Thursday in July.
The FAA's
so
data.
I'm just going.
The top travel day of the week was Thursday with 2.58 million overall movements, with the second busiest day being Friday with 2.54 million. Saturday is the least busy day, and I can't tell you how many operations because the chart only says
they didn't give you any hits.
they didn't give us that data.
Oh.
But numbers are trending overall back up. 2024 was busier than 2023, busier than the year before. We are still not at 2019 levels, which was 17.01 million. So we're a couple 100,000 flights short still.
So this is all.
This is everything. This is
flights?
IFR flights. Every single flight under IFR. Interestingly, though, cancellation rates hovering at 1.2% for both 2024 and 2023, despite there being more flights this year than last year. And, we had that whole CrowdStrike thing in there.
Yeah.
So if not for that, it would have been probably the best year for cancellations dating back to at least 2016.
How about that? The IFR flights is interesting because a report by Air Insight based on our data shows that domestic service in the U.S. by commercial airlines was higher for the first time than 2019 in 2024.
So I guess there's a lot less GA movement, probably.
Well, no, because the GA wouldn't necessarily be IFR flights, but it would include international aircraft or international flights. So I wonder how much international traffic is still down compared to. But what was the difference again? There was 17 million.
17.01 million in 2019 compared to 16.86 million in 2024.
Okay, so we're almost there. So 2025 is the year that will top back over 2019. Interesting.
Yeah, Everyone loves a good year-end review, and the FAA bringing some powerful numbers.
There you go. That was fun. That was a good way to end the episode.
I can't believe you got all that right.
I mean, thankfully, not much has changed, and I cheated by knowing our own statistics, I guess.
It's beneficial that you are smart, so actually the end of year holidays aren't all that busy compared to the summer peak of madness.
The least busy day of the year across the entire world for travel is Christmas Day. So if you ever need to really, really go somewhere, book a flight on Christmas.
If you want that upgrade, fly on Christmas.
Yeah, fly on Christmas. All right. That was a fun way to end the episode, and end the episode we shall. This has been episode 302 of AvTalk. Thank you to everyone who tuned in last week for our special episode. And if you're a new listener to the podcast, we hope you've enjoyed this episode. If we can impose upon you to leave us a rating or a review wherever you do listen to the podcast, whether that's on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, or wherever, we would be ever so grateful. Jason and I, they give us more of, it's like a kibble that they feed us, and they give us more of it if we get more ratings and reviews. So please do that. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Thanks for listening.